after Pesach is over.
We were, the last time we were in Masechet Tamid, we came now to the last chapter. I wanted to clarify something from the first Mishnah. It said, Bizman shekohen gadol nichnas lishtachavot, shosha achozin bo, echad b'yamino, v'echad b'smalo, v'echad b'avanim tovot. So, right, when the Kohen, it says, at the time the Kohen Gadol went in to bow down. And the Bartanura says it means he went into the Heichal. And he says, just briefly, V'lo mikari abiyah shelo letzorech. It's not called coming in for no need, with no need. Because if it was, and I think we mentioned this at the time, there's an azhara from the Torah not to come in, right? Al yavo b'chol eit al hakodesh mibeit parochet, which we see in Parshat Achrayma, and Chazal darshan that there's an isur, there's an isur for anybody to go into Kodesh HaKodeshim except for the Kohen Gadol, 4 times on Yom Kippur. And otherwise, you're chayav mitah. But there's also an isur for any kohen to go into the heichal if it's not for avodah. So the Bartanura tells us that when the Kohen Gadol went in to bow down, that's not called biyah shelo letzorech. It's not called going in without a need. And I'll just show you the Rambam. This is how the Rambam words this in Mishnah Torah. This is in Hilchot Klei HaMikdash v'Ha'ovdim Bo. The beginning of this chapter, it's Perek Hey. It's a general description about things that are exceptional about the Kohen Gadol. We won't go through them right now, although we may come back to them eventually. And it gets to this part here. It says, Bizman shekohen gadol nichnas lahechal lishtachavot, shosha ochazin bo. So I just want to explain that right before this, it's not talking about the Kohen Gadol and the Avodah and the Beit HaMikdash per se. As I said, it's talking about different dinim that are particular to the Kohen Gadol. And this is brought as part of a list of things that are particular to the Kohen Gadol. So it just says, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Heichal to bow down, 3 hold on to him. So what does it mean that when he goes in to bow down? I think we also asked this in the Mishnah itself. And it's obviously, the Rambam is bringing this from the Mishnah that we just saw in Masechet Tamid. And he's quoting it almost verbatim. It just says, in the Mishnah, it says, Bizman shekohen gadol nichnas lishtachavot. And in the Rambam, wait a second. In the Rambam, he adds in the word lahechal when he goes into the heichal. It doesn't say what he's going in for, except to say that when he goes in to bow down. And then he describes, like we see in the Mishnah, how that was done. He would go in with 3 other Kohanim, one on his right, one on his left, and one who would be holding on to the precious stones of the ephod that are behind him, or behind his shoulders or on top of his shoulders. And he would go into the Heichal and bow down. So what was the heter for him to go in is that there's an understanding that going in to bow down is considered itself to be an avodah. that in itself is an avodah, and that's why the Bartanura says it's not considered to be shelo letzorech. And the Rambam implies this here in Hilchot Biyata Mikdash, the second chapter. He says, "Vanichnas lekodesh chutz lekodesh hakodashim shelo la'avodah o lihishtachavot." If somebody goes into the kodesh outside of or besides the kodesh hakodashim, not for the purpose of doing service or not to bow down. In other words, the lishtachavot is nimshach acharei hashelo. If he went in shelo la'avodah or shelo lihishtachavot is how you should understand it. Ben hedyot, ben gadol. In other words, whether it's a kohen hedyot or a kohen gadol, lokeh. He's chayav malkut. Ve'eno chayav mitah. Going into the Heichal Shelo Letzorech, to take the words of the Bartanura, is not a Chiyuv Mitah, because of this drasha from that pasuk. It says El Panei Kaporot V'lo Yamut. The pasuk said, "Vayomer Hashem El Moshe Deber Al Aaron Achicha V'al Yavo B'chol Eit El Hakodesh Mibeit LaParochet." Don't come at any time into the Kodesh that is outside of the parochet, el penei hakaporet, to the front of or the face of the kaporet, which is what sits on top of the aron, asher aharon, right? That's inside of the kodesh hakodeshim, v'lo yamut. That is, if you don't come at any time, then you won't die. Ki be'anan era el kaporet, because or at the time when I am show myself in a cloud on Kaporet, that's when you can come, or other ways of reading that part of the Pasuk. But the way Chazal understood the Pasuk is that it's talking about two Isurim. Al yavo b'chol eit al hakodesh mibeit laparochet, that's an Isur. El penei hakaporet asher aharon v'lo yamut. And you also can't go in front of the Kaporet inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and that's a chiyuv mitah. That's the v'lo yamut, according to this understanding, refers to going in front of the kaporet, that is, going into the kodesh hakodeshim. So the Rambam, in this context, he tells us if you go into the kodesh outside of the kodesh hakodeshim, not for the purpose of avodah and not for the purpose of bowing down, because bowing down is in itself a type of avodah. And so avodah here refers to the avodot, the kinds of avodot that we saw, that you have to go in to do the, to clean the mizbeach haktaret and lahativ et hanerot and to light the nerot and to light the ktaret, and eventually we'll talk about the avodah that was done on the shulchan. All of those are stam avodah, and then there's hishtachavaya, which is also considered to be a kind of an avodah. So that I just wanted to expound on that a little bit. Then we did Mishnah Bet, and we learned that. So this idea that the Kohen Gadol would go in to bow down, it seems like that would be something that he could do if he wanted to do. It doesn't, because even by the way it's worded here and the way the Rambam words it, it doesn't sound like it's something that he had to do, but if he wanted, he could go in at this juncture to bow down. This would be, what's this juncture? It's after they finished all the other avodot for the time being. He could go in and bow down, and then he would come out, and then he and all the other kohanim will stand on the stairs going up to the ulam, and 5 people had kelim in their hands. We talked about this, and at the end of that shiur, Paul asked the question, how can these people do Nesiat, because then they're going to do Nesiat Kapayim. And he asks, how can they do Nesiat Kapayim if they're holding the kelim in their hands? And I didn't find a direct answer to that, except to say that if I find something definitive, I will tell you. But I think what I said then and what I say now is I have a feeling that before they would do the bracha, that they would put their kelim on the one of the tables that was in front of the mizbeach. And I think I mentioned this last time also, but we'll just take a look. This is the mizbeach, and you see here there are these two tables. One is of shayish, one was marble, and one was of silver. And the one that was of silver, that's where they would put kelim in the morning that would be needed for the avodah. They would lay them out there. It stands to reason that when they finished with their job, that they would have put their kelim there, right? So the Mishnah just says that there were 5 who had kelim in their hands. It doesn't say what they did with them, but it stands to reason, I think, that they would have put them back there for the time being so that they could do Nesiat Kapayim. That's my theory. Those were the things I wanted to try to clarify. And eventually I do want to come back to talk about Birkat Kohanim in greater depth, but for now, I think we're going to just continue in the Mishnah. Yeah. So we're in Mishnah Gimel. So at the end of Mishnah Bet, right, they've done the Nesiat Kapayim, and now it's talking more generally, since we brought up at the beginning of the chapter this idea that the Kohen Gadol could go into the Hechal and bow down. Now we're going to expound a little bit on other options that were open to the Kohen Gadol. We learned already back when we were learning Yoma that on any given day, the Kohen Gadol could choose to do any of the avodot he wanted without a payis. And here it's going to talk about that in a little more detail. Bizman shekohen gadol rotze lahaktir.
רגע, שומעים אותך.
Okay. I thought that might be a question for here. Okay. So, bizman shekohen gadol rotze lahaktir haya oleh bekevesh v'hasgan bimino. So when the Kohen Gadol wanted to lahaktir, here we're talking not about haktarat haktaret, but rather what? What would he be maktir on the outer altar?
Parts of the korban.
Yeah, if he wants to burn parts of the korban on the mizbeach. So, of course, we learned there's a payis for that. But again, if the Kohen Gadol wanted, he could do it without a payis. So, at a time when the Kohen Gadol wants to lahaktir, and this, by the way, also I think indicates to us, it's the same lashon here, bizman shekohen gadol, at the time that the Kohen Gadol does X. It sounds like, again, here it's very clear. It's at a time that he's chosen to do this. So just like that, we understand that when he went in to bow down in the Hechal, that was something that he chose to do, but that he didn't have to do. And so here he's chosen to do this avodah of burning the limbs that are part of the korban, and presumably we're still talking about the korban tamid. And where were the limbs for the korban tamid before they were burnt?
On the ramp.
They were on the ramp. By the way, and I mentioned a moment ago that there were these two tables that were next to the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. So one was made of marble, the one that was made of marble, that would hold limbs of other korbanot that had been that were prepared for putting on the Mizbeach. They would put them on that table, but the korban tamid they would put on the kavesh, or it also, that was a table that would be used if they ran out of room for the kavesh, they could put them on that table. But right now, we know from earlier in Masechet Tamid that the limbs had been put up to halfway up on the ramp, and then they went off and did various things, and then they came back to burn the limbs. So now if the Kohen Gadol wants, he can do this. So he kavesh baskan bimino. So he would go up the ramp with the skan at his right. Higia lamachatzita kevesh, when he got halfway up the ramp, right? So he got up halfway up the ramp. That's where the limbs are. Achaz haskan biyamino v'ha'alehu. The skan would hold on to his right, to his right arm, and take him up. Then he would go all the way up. Hoshit lo harishon harosh v'haregel. So the first one would hand over to him the head and the leg. V'samach aleihan uzrakan. And then he would lean on them and throw them. So who's this Rishon that's handing something to the Kohen Gadol?
It's the first of the Kohanim that he was the first to get the rosh and the regel from after the shechita, and so he's holding it on the ramp.
Right. So he had laid it down earlier on the ramp, and then he came to take it again. Or actually, if you remember, there's a machloket whether there's a separate payis for that. But yes, presumably whoever won the payis for bringing the rosh and the regel, now he goes up on the ramp, he lifts up the rosh and the regel, and he hands it over, or he holds it, hoshitlo, so he's holding it out in front of him, in front of the Kohen Gadol, and then the samach aleihen uzrakan, and he leans on them and throws them. So who leans on them and throws them?
The Kohen Gadol.
Right, so that's what the Kohen Gadol will do. Then he does the smicha, and then he's the one who throws them onto the fire of the Mizbeach. Hang on. Oh, okay. Hoshit lo harishon, right, I'm sorry. Hoshita sheni larishon shtei hayadayim notnan lekohen gadol v'samach alehen uzrakan nishmata sheni v'halach lo. So then the second one, in other words, the second kohen who had been zochet to bring the two arms, he holds them out. Hoshita sheni larishon, he holds them out to the first one, to the first kohen who had already come up and did the rosh and the regel. That first kohen is still there. The second one comes up. He hands the shtei yadayim to the first kohen. Notnan the kohen gadol. He gives them to the kohen gadol. V'samach aleihen uzrakan, and he leans on them and throws them. And then nishmat hasheni v'halach lo. This second kohen who had the shtei yadayim to begin with, he goes away. He welcome back. He goes away and Nishmat, like he escapes. I can't think of a good word for it right now, right? But he goes. So v'kach hayu moshitin lo sh'ar kol ha'evarim, and thus they would hand to him all of the rest of the limbs. V'hu somech alehen v'zorkan. So that's how they would do all the rest of the limbs. What does it mean that's how they would do all the rest of the limbs? Who would actually hand the limbs to the Kohen Gadol?
I mean, presumably whoever had the pious, or the one who selected by the pious.
Yeah, but that's not what we just learned. So who? That's a good presumption if you didn't read the Mishnah. But when the second one came up, who handed the limbs to the Kohen Gadol?
It would still be the first Kohen who's still there.
Right. So again, when the first one comes up, Hoshit lo harishon arosh v'regel v'samach alehen uzrakan. When the first one comes up, he holds out the rosh and the regel for the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol does smicha and then throws them onto the mizbeach. Then the second one comes up, Hoshita sheni larishon. The second one comes and he hands them over to the first Kohen, the Shtei Yadayim, who gives them to the Kohen Gadol, who leans on them and throws them. Then Nishmat Hasheni v'halachlo. The second one leaves. Where's the first one?
He's still there.
He's still there. V'kachayu moshitin lo sha'ar kol ha'evarin. And that's how they would hand to him all of the rest of the limbs, meaning what? All the subsequent Kohanim who came up to bring who had won the pious to bring the Evarim to the Kevesh would come up one by one and hand their limbs to the first Kohen who had handed over the Rosh and the Regel, and that first Kohen would hold them for the Kohen Gadol, who would do smicha and zrika, right? So that's kacha yumoshitin lo. That's how they would continue to do it. Kacha yumoshitin lo sha'ar kol ha'evarin, v'hu somech alehem v'zorkan, and he would lean on them and throw them. Ubizman shehu rotzeh, and it's again we have this lashon bizman, right? At the time that he wants, and here it's explicit. Just like here it was explicit, rotzeh, at the time that he wants, usomeh v'acherim zorkim. If he wants, he can also just do the smicha, and another kohen can throw them on, presumably the first kohen who had been holding them for him. Ba lo lahakif et hamizbeach. When he comes to go around the mizbeach, to circumnavigate the mizbeach, mehechan hu matchil. From where does he begin? So let's just understand at this point, all of the Evarim have been from the Korban Tamid have now been put onto the mizbeach. And this again, when we're talking about this in a situation where the Kohen Gadol chose to do the Haktara, because otherwise we know already that when other Kohanim do it, Lefi HaPayis, we already finished this part. We did this already. But it's talking about if we would go back now and insert this into this whole area earlier when the other Kohanim were doing the Haktara. This is when the Kohen Gadol wants to do the Haktara. This was the Seder of how it was done. And beyond that, if he wanted to, he could now go around the Mizbeach. And if he goes around the Mizbeach, from where would he begin? Mikeren Dromit Mizrachit. He would start from the southeast corner. Mizrachit Sfonit, he'd go to the northeast corner. Sfonit Ma'aravit, then he'd go to the northwest corner. Ma'aravit Dromit, and he would come then to the southwest corner. So just to remind us of what that looks like. Yeah. So he had been standing here at the top of the kevesh and throwing the evarim onto the fire. This was the maracha for the korban tamid. He would be throwing them there. And now, if he wants, he can walk around the mizbeach. So he would start from here. This is Keren Dromit Mizrachit. This is the southeast. And then he'd go to the northeast, then he'd go to the northwest, and then he would end up here at the southwest. And it's this Karen here is where you do the nisachim, where you do the libations, which we'll talk about now. Natnulo yaim l'nasech. So when he would reach that southwest corner, they would give him the wine for the libation. Haskan omeid al hakeren, v'hasudarim biyado. The skan would be standing on the corner, in other words, on that southwest corner, and he would have sudarim in his hands. He would have scarves, think of them as scarves. Like there's strips of they're like strips of cloth. Ushnei kohanim omdim al shulchan hachalavim, and there's two kohanim who are standing on the table for chalavim. The table for chalavim, literally the table for fats. So again, that was one of these tables here. One of them was a marble table where they would put evarim for other korbanot. They would now, you'd have two kohanim standing on that table. I'm not sure which one it is, and I'm not sure if it's specified which one was which. But now they're standing on that table when the Kohen Gadol is about to do the Nisuch HaYayin. And it's called Shulchan HaChalavim, right? Chalavim are fats that are burnt on the Mizbeach. It was actually for Evarim, but they called it Shulchan HaChalavim. Ushtei chatzatzrot shel kesef biyadam. They had two silver horns, two silver trumpets, taku v'heriu v'taku. They would do a tekiah truat kiyah. Ba'u v'yamdu eitzel ben Arza. Then they would go and stand next to Ben Arza, who was a guy who used to play the cymbals, which we'll see in a moment. Echad mimino v'echad mismolo. One to the right of Ben Arza and one to his left. Shachar v'nasech. He would bow to do the libation. So who would bow to do the libation?
The Kohen Gadol.
The Kohen Gadol, right? So everybody's getting ready for the Nisuch HaYayin. He bows, and he bends over to do the Nisuch. Vehenif haskan besudarim. Then the skan waves the sudarim, which we'll see. It was a signal so that everybody knows what to do. not everybody can see the Kohen Gadol when he's doing the Nisuch. So the Sgan HaKohen is standing next to him, and once the Nisuch HaYayin is done, he waves the Sudarim, Hikish ben Arza b'tzeltzal, and then Ben Arza bangs the cymbals together, V'dibru ha'levi'im b'shir, and then the Levi'im speak their song. Presumably that's when they sing, but we saw this earlier. They call it dibur. So I don't know more than what it says, but that's how it's phrased. That would be the signal for the Levi'im to start the shir. Higiu leferek, when they came to a chapter, meaning when they came to the end of a chapter, taku v'hishtachavu ha'am. Then the people who had been blowing before, they blow, and the people all bow down. Al kol perek tkiya. At the end of each chapter, there would be a tkiya. Al kol tkiya hishtachavaya. And every time there was a tkiya, the people would bow down. Zehu seder hatamid la'avodat beit Elokeinu. This is the order of the tamid. It says tamir. I see it's a typo. My mistake. Or it's either my mistake or it's the website's mistake that I copied from, but whatever. It's Zeh seder hatamid la'avodat beit Elokeinu, for the service in the house of our Lord. Yihiratzon shibaneh b'mheira b'yameinu amen. Right? May it be His will that it be rebuilt speedily in our days. Amen. So this marks the end of the service that was done in the morning, of the Korban Tamid of the morning. Then we're going to go through the Bartanura, but I'll just point out the next Mishnah is the shirim that the Levim did. It's the Shir Shel Yom. Everybody knows this Mishnah because we have it in the davening on Shabbat. The Shir Shel Yuha Levim Omrim B'Mikdash. And then it says, right, each mizmor that was said for each day. And I think next, I want to finish this now up until the end of Mishnah Gimel. Next week, I want to do this Mishnah, and I would like to look at each of the Pirkei Tehillim to understand a little bit better about why each one was chosen. This Mishnah, the Mishnah Daled, is quoted in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and there's a discussion about why particular shirim were chosen for particular days. So that'll be for next time. In the meantime, let's look back here now at the Mishnah with the Bartanura. Okay. Bizman shekohen gadol rotzeh la'aktir, Bartanura says shu maktir kol zman sheyirtzeh, because he can burn the limbs anytime he wants. V'notel chelek kesheyirtzeh. He also takes a portion as he wants. What does it mean that he takes a portion as he wants?
He can eat from the parts of the korban that could be eaten. He could eat.
Right. So not the korban tamid, because that was a korban olah, but on any of the korbanot where kohanim were going to divide amongst themselves the food. Hu notel chelik barosh. He gets to choose first which piece he wants. L'machatzita kevesh. So he would go up with the skan on his right. He'd go up halfway up the ramp. And he would already be a little tired out. In other words, the Bartanura is explaining why is it that when he gets halfway up the ramp, that's when the skan holds on to his right and goes up with him. So it means the skan holds on to his right because Kohen Gadol is already getting a little tired out, and the skan helps him. So then he gets up to the top. Hoshid lo rishon rosh v'haregel, v'samach alehen uzrakan. So the first one hands him the head and the leg, and he leans on them and he throws them. Samach alehen, mishum kvodo shel kohen gadol. This was out of respect for the kohen gadol. Shetehei chashuva haktarato yoter mishar kohanim. That his haktara should be more important than the other kohanim. So what does it mean? What does it imply? What's out of respect to the kohen gadol?
Allowing the Kohen Gadol to do the smicha.
Right. So he's somech on each piece, and that's something that was special that the Kohen Gadol would do. The Tosfos Yantov points out what is exceptional about this for the Kohen, that it's done out of that this is like a kavod of the Kohen Gadol. Tosfos Yantov says, "Do smicha dekra, when the Torah tells us to do smicha on a korban, lo ashkachan ela b'chayim v'lo b'shchutim." The only time that the Torah discusses doing smicha is while the animal is still alive, not after it's already been shechted, as it says elsewhere in the Mishnah, Masechet Menachot. So this was, and we didn't see this before, right? When it wasn't the Kohen Gadol who was putting the limbs onto the fire, there wasn't smicha. But the Kohen Gadol, if he's doing the haktara, then he's somech on each of the evarim before they get thrown onto the fire. Uzrakan, and he throws them. Kididarshinan vasita olotecha basar v'hadam, madam bizrika, af basar bizrika. So it says in Dvarim, when it's talking about doing the korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash, it says, Vasita olotecha, you'll do your burnt offerings, abasar v'hadam, the flesh and the blood, al misbach Hashem elokecha, on the altar of the Lord your God, v'dam zvachecha yishafecha al misbach Hashem elokecha v'basar tochel. Okay, that's talking, we won't go into all the drashot on this pasuk, but what do you see? There's a relationship that's established between the basar and the dam. That when you do your olot, you do the basar and the dam on the mizbeach. You do the flesh and the blood on the mizbeach. So the drasha is ma dam bizrika. We learn elsewhere that the dam has to be, you have to throw the blood onto the mizbeach. So we learn from that, just like we were zorek the dam, we're also zorek the basar. So that's why it says uzrakan, and he would throw them. Then the second one would come up, and he would hand the first one the two yadayim. He'd give them to the Kohen Gadol, who would do smicha and throw them, and then nishmat hasheni v'halach lo. Aval harishon nishar sham lekabel ha'evarim min hamoshitin v'litnan the Kohen Gadol. So as we surmised from the Mishnah, but the Barchanur says explicitly, it doesn't say the first one left, so the first one stayed. He stayed there to accept the Evarim from the people who came up to hand them over, and then the first one would give them to the Kohen Gadol. All right, so then he finishes all of the throwing of the Evarim, and now Ba'alo lahakif et hamizbeach. If he wants to go around the mizbeach, Kohen Gadol shaya barosh hakevesh shehu b'darom, the Kohen Gadol who was at the top of the ramp, which is in the south, makif derech yamin, he goes around beginning with his right. He goes by way of his right. Because all of the turnings that you do, you should only turn right. In other words, if you have to start out on a course of some sort or any kind of path, you're supposed to start out by going right. So that's why he would go first to his right, which was the southeast corner, as we saw in the diagram. And he'd go to the northeast corner, until he would come to this, until right then he would go to the next corner, and then he would eventually come to the southwest corner. There were two holes. Did we discuss this before? There were two holes in the southwest corner where the libations would go.
We did not discuss that.
We did not discuss it. So I'll just tell you that it's described also in the Mishnah Midot, and here in the diagram. That's why they make these two holes. I'm not sure if this is exactly accurate that they're here or actually on the Karen, but the point is there were two holes and they weren't actually the same size. The one for water was narrower, and the one for the wine was wider because they wanted them to go down at the same rate, and the wine was thicker. So they would make a narrow one for the wine and they would make the narrow one for the water, so it would go down slower, and the wine would go down faster. So they would come out at this sort of at the same. They would go down at like the same rate. So those were the two holes here. That's where.
Where do they go down to?
So they go. It's an interesting question. I wanted to prepare this. They go down next to. Hold on a second. Oh. I'll come back to that. But they go down through the Mizbeach, and they come out over here, and they end up in this Amah, this little sort of gutter.
Trench.
Yeah, trench. It's a gutter sort of thing that where water is flowing in the Beit HaMikdash. They would end up there. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Right, until he got to, so the Kohen Gadol would get to the southwest corner. That's where there were two holes, Shayayin v'mayim shenaschin, that the wine and the water that were being libated, Yordin bahen, they would go down through those holes. And Yisham holchin l'shitin shehena yisedot, they would go to the shitin, which were the foundations. V'sham omed kohen echad moshid lo hayayin l'nesachim. This is going back to when the kohen gets there. When the kohen gets to this corner, sham omed kohen echad, one kohen that we mentioned earlier was in the Mishnah. It says it's the skan is waiting for him there. Umoshit lo hayayin l'nesachim, and he would hand him the wine for the libations. About Kohen Gadol, all right, and then of course, when in the Nisuch HaMayim would be when they had Nisuch HaMayim. When was the Nisuch HaMayim?
Sukkot.
On Sukkot. So that's when they would do also a Nisuch HaMayim. So Moshito Hayayin l'Nesachim, he would hand him the wine for the libations. About Kohen Gadol lo haya nosei hayayin imo. The Kohen Gadol would not carry the wine with him when he did his circuit around the Mizbeach. Shemi yitkalkel hayayin ba'ashan ha'ma'aracha k'shemakiv et ha'mizbeach. lest the wine go bad or be ruined from the smoke of the fire that's on the Mizbeach when he goes around the Mizbeach. And also, while he's going around, he can turn over with this kind of pitchfork, this kind of forky thing, the tzinora, dainu mazleg, et ha'evarim shelo nit'aklu al mizbeach. He could turn over the limbs that had not been consumed on the mizbeach. In other words, he can poke them into maybe a better spot or turn them over so that they will burn better. But other kohanim, when they do the nisuch hayayin, הולכים דרך שמאל מן הכבש לדרומית מערבית שהוא קרוב לכבש. If other kohanim do, not the Kohen Gadol, if other kohanim do the nisuch hayayin, they go directly to the southwest corner. It was only the Kohen Gadol who would do this circuit. Keditnan be'per kodshei kodashim, like we learn in Per Kodshei Kodashim, which is in Masechet Zvachim, Kol ha'olim holchin derech yamin, chutz min ha'oleh lishlosha dvarim. All those who go up onto the Mizbech go by way of the right, except for somebody who goes up for these three things: Nisuch hayayin, v'hamayim, v'olat ha'of. Somebody goes up to do nisuch hayayin, or to do nisuch hamayim, or who does olat ha'of. Olat ha'of was the malika was done there on that corner of the mizbeach, on the southwest corner. Hayayin v'hamayim. So why doesn't the Kohen Gadol carry these things with him? And he, in other words, even though he's going, or I don't know if that's the right phrasing, he doesn't carry them when he goes around. And other Kohanim don't carry them because they, in any event, go directly to the place where they're going to be doing these, either Nisuch Yain or Mayim, or doing Olat Ha'ov. So why don't you carry the wine and the water around? Shelo yitashnu, so that they won't get smoky from the fire. And also Olat Ha'ov Nami, Shelo Tamut Be'ashan. He has to take a live, the fowl that he's going to do with, that he'll do the Olat Ha'ov with, is alive when he's holding it before the Malika. There's a fear that it's going to choke to death from the fire, from the smoke from the fire. So those would all be done directly on the southwest corner. The Kohen Gadol shedomeh leben bayit, the Kohen Gadol who's like a ben bayit, right? He's like a member of the household. Sheyesh lo reshut lahalech kamo shu chafetz, that he has permission to go as he pleases. Meaning what? Meaning that he can walk around. He doesn't have to go directly to that corner, and he can go around. Unlike the other Kohanim, we're not permitted to do that. The Kohen Gadol can also turn over the limbs on the fire without a pais. So he has permission to go around, and when he goes around, then he goes around in order that he can go to the right, right? Because if he goes to the left, so it means that if he wants, he can go around. If he goes to the left, then he doesn't go around, because then he would be skipping the mitzvah, right? He doesn't go to the left and then go all the way around and come back to the left. Second. But when he wants to go around, he can go around. He goes to his right and goes all the way around and ends up at the southwest corner. Is all that clear?
Yep.
more or less. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there a team to clean up the whole thing after they did there should be a lot of blood and wine.
And
Well, the wine, right? So, yeah, like there would have been blood like on the kevesh, right? Because they had laid the limbs out on the kevesh.
Also the wine, or maybe this talot they could clock up with time or something. I don't know.
Yes, so there is a discussion about this, and there were Billy Nether, I'll bring it to you next time, and I think it's a Mishnah in Shkalim that the Kohanim, actually it seems to me this is, hold on a second. Let me just see if I can find this question quickly, because actually I think it's a Mishnah in Psachim. It was one of the things, just a second. No, wait. I'm confusing something. I'm not. So I'll find it for next time. There, it was what the Kohanim would do would be they would stop up the amat hamayim and let it overflow into the on the surface of the floor of the Beit HaMikdash to wash away all of the blood and the dirt and whatever. Presumably, they would also take it to take up water and from there to rub down or wash down the ramp. Believe Nether, I'll find that for you next time.
The shulchanot also.
Yes, also the shulchanot would have to be washed off. So yes, that would happen. It's mentioned elsewhere, and I'm not remembering right now where it's mentioned. But yes,
if they don't do it, there will be a lot of flies around.
That's also true. No, it's true. I mean, in the summer it would be a disaster. So yeah, they would wash down the blood from all these places. I think. So if it's bothering me now, but it's either there might be now I can't remember if it's Shkalim or Eruvin, but I'll find it for you. Let's continue in the Mishnah here. So we talked about the Kohen Gadol going around the Mizbeach. Nanulo yain lenasech. So then when the Kohen Gadol gets to the southwest corner, they give him the wine for the libation. Haskan omed al Karen, the skan is standing on the corner of Asudurim biyado. So the Bartanur says, Haskan omed al Karen, etzel Kohen Gadol sheba nasech. The skan is standing next to the high priest when he's coming to do the wine libation. Asudurim biyado lahanif kishiyanasech Kohen. They're there for him to wave when the Kohen Gadol does the nisuch, or even if it's not the Kohen Gadol, if we are talking here about the Kohen Gadol, but whatever Kohen is doing it, he's there for when the Kohen does the nisuch. Kadei sheyedu haleviim v'yidabru b'shir. It was so that he would wave the sudarim, so that the Levim would know, right? Because they're not right in the Azara; they're basically in front of the Azara. And then they would say their song, V'yeda ben Arza v'yakish b'tzaltzal, k'damar b'samuch. And ben Arza would also know, and he would clap his cymbals. There were two Kohanim who would stand on Shulchan HaChalavim, and the Bartur explains, Shtei Shulchanot hayu b'ma'aravo shel kevesh. There were two tables on the west of the ramp. Echad Shulchan shel kesef, shebo notnin klei sharet. One of them was a silver table. That's where they put the klei sharet. Echad Shulchan shel shai, shebo notnin ha'evarim. And the other one was made of marble, and that's where they would put the limbs, meaning the limbs from other, like I said, from other korbanot, or if they ran out of space on the kevesh. Uhu nikra Shulchan HaChalavim. That was called the Shulchan HaChalavim, and it was made of shayish. I think we talked about this also when we were talking about the shulchanot that were next to, were in the north, where they used to cut up the korbanot. Those, even though there was this idea in the Beit HaMikdash that you should make things out of silver and gold, but the tables that were used for cutting up or for holding meat were not made out of metal. They were made out of shayish. Why did they make those out of shayish, even though shayish was much cheaper? And
if you're wielding a cleaver, you need a hard surface.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Gold and silver are both soft metals, and particularly.
You know what? That's true. That's all true. But that wasn't the main reason that they chose to make this out of shayish. But what you're saying is also true. I honestly didn't think about that, but I'm not sure that they wielded a cleaver on these tables, because what we learned is that they
or even a knife. Like if you're cutting up meat, you want to do it. You want to do it on a hard surface.
No. But I'm saying all of the cutting was done when they hung the animal. Right, we learned it earlier. They hung the animal on a hook, and then we went through in gory detail about how it was dismembered. So I don't think there was any knife. I don't think there was any sharp object or anything like that. That wasn't the reason. Can you think of another reason why you would prefer to put meat on marble rather than on metal?
It might stay colder.
So it might stay colder. Or yes, or the way it's described is sort of the flip side of that. If you put it on the metal, it might warm up and it might go bad, right? So you keep it you keep it on marble so that it stays colder, so that it doesn't go bad. We don't want it to start to stink before it goes on to the mizbeach. So that's why the shulchan that was for the klei sharet, that they would make out of silver, but the shulchanot that would hold limbs or any kind of meat from the animal, those would be made out of shayish, including this one that was next to the mizbeach. And then Ben Arza, he would see the sudarim flying around, and he would hit the cymbal. And who was Ben Arza? Shem Adam Hamakish B'Tzaltzal. This was the name of the guy who played the cymbal Belaz. When the Leviim Higiu LePerek, then the Leviim would sing when they finished the parsha. Higiu LePerek L'Sof Parasha. Then Taku V'Ishtachavu Ha'am. Then there would be a tkiya, and the people would bow down. Al kol perek tkiya ve'al kol tkiya ishtachavaya. And then zehu seder hatamid la'avodat beit Elokeinu yiratzon shibaneh b'mehera v'yameinu amen. 1 second. Let me just here, I'll show you 2 things. Excuse me. That's so impolite. So just 2 things. I think one of them I may have referenced before. But this one we didn't look at. This is a Mishnah in Shkalim that talks about the shulchanot that were in the mikdash. Shlosha asar shulchanot hayu b'mikdash. There were 13 tables in the mikdash. Shmona shel shayish bebeit hamikdash. 8 of them were made of. There were 8 that were made from marble in Beit HaMitbachayim. The Beit HaMitbachayim was this area which I know we discussed before, in the north of the Mizbeach. 1 second, I'll show you a little picture.
And that's next to where the rings were, Nachon.
Exactly, next to where the rings were. So using this picture, here's our altar, here are the rings, and then you see there are 8 shulchanot. So those are the 8 shulchanot that are in that's called the Beit Mitbachayim, the place where they would cut up the animals. And right, so those were Shmona Shel Shayish Bebeit HaMitbachayim, Shalein Medichinat HaKravayim. We learned earlier in Masechet Tamid that when the innards were taken out, then they were placed onto the onto a table, and they were rinsed out on that table. Ushnayim b'ma'arav hakevesh. These are the 2 that we were talking about today. There were 2 on the west side of the ramp. Echad shel shayish ve'echad shel kesef. 1 of marble, 1 of silver. Al shel shayish notnin et ha'evarim. On the silver one, they would put. On the marble one, they would put the limbs. Al shel kesef klei sharet. Ushnayim be'ulam mibifnim al petach habayit. There were 2 in the olam inside, at the opening to the house, to the main room. Echad shel shayish ve'echad shel zahav. Let's see a picture of that. Yeah. There's 1 here and 1 here. So one is
They are near the Kior.
No. These ones that are near the Kior, those are the ones we just spoke about. So here, there's 1 of shayish and 1 of silver, and the one we call shulchan hachalavim, and the other one was for holding klei sharet. But now there's also these 2 up here. There's that as you go. So here you go into the. This is the entrance into the ulam.
You're not showing us them.
You don't see them. Oh, it says my.
No.
I'm sorry. It says, hold on. Sorry. Now do you see? Do you see the?
Oh, no,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, something technical happened. Okay, so the Mishnah now is talking about these 2. That after these 2, then there are also these 2. There's 1 here, and there's one here. And what were those for? Yeah. I'll just. Okay, so I'm sorry. Echad shel shaish ve'echad shel zahav. These are shnayim be'ulam
של
negi'im al petach
של
haba.
כסף, של כסף.
Echad shel shaish ve'echad shel zahav. That was my mistake.
אוקיי, אוקיי.
I think that was a slip of my tongue, because the ones next to the mizbeach, there one was shel shaish and one was shel kesef, and here echad shel shaish ve'echad shel zahav. So there's one that's made of marble and one that's made of gold. Al shel shaish notnim lechem hapanim b'chnisato. This is where the lechem hapanim would be placed on the way into the hechal. The al shel zahav b'yitziato. And then, right, because every Shabbat they would change them out. So they would bring them up to the first one on the right. That would be made of shaish. And that's where they would put the new bread. And then when they switched out then they would bring it inside. They would switch out the new bread for the old bread. The old bread, in other words, from the previous Shabbat, on its way out, it would be placed al shel zahav. That would go onto the gold table, b'yitziato, on its way out. Shema'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin, because we go up in holiness and not down. So since it would have to make a stop on the way in and a stop on the way out, we make the first one of a lesser material, which would be shaish, and when the second one we make of a greater material or more expensive material, and that would be the gold one. Then v'achad shel zahav bifnim shalav lechem hapanim tamid. And then there was also, of course, a shulchan inside, which was for the lechem hapanim. So those were the shulchanot in the Beit HaMikdash. The other thing I wanted to show you, and I think we did look at this one other time, but since we were talking about it now, we'll just mention here in the end of Sukkah and Parakeh Mishnah, it talks about all of these tikiyot that were in the Beit HaMikdash. Ein pochtin me'asrim v'achad tikiyot b'mikdash. Ve'in mosifin arba'im u'shmona. In other words, every day there was never less than 21 tikiyot in the Mikdash, and there were never more than 48. B'chol yom ayu sham esrim v'achad tikiyot b'mikdash. Every day there was 21. Shalosh v'tichat sharim. They would blow shofar 3 times when they opened the gates. That was almost at the very beginning of Tamid. V'teisha l'tamid shel shachar. There would be 9 that would be blown during the Tamid shel shachar. V'teisha l'tamid shel ben ha'arba'im. 9 for Tamid shel of the afternoon. U'v'musaf. So that was for every day, right? So there were 3 in the morning when they opened the gates. 9 for the korban Tamid shel shachar. 9 for the korban Tamid shel ben ha'arba'im. So on any day there was a musaf, so let's say every Shabbat, there would be another 9. So that would make it how many? If every day there was 21, and then on Shabbat you would have at least another 9 for musaf for Shabbat. So that makes it
30.
Ve'erev Shabbat hayu mosifin od sheish. On any given Erev Shabbat, there would be another 6. Shalosh lahavtil ha'amim lacha. 3 to get the people to stop doing work, right? To make them batel from their work. V'shalosh lahavdil ben kodesh l'chol. And then another 3 to distinguish between kodesh and chol. This is the antecedent for the siren that they do in Yerushalayim. To let you know when it's time to light candles. So in the Beit HaMikdash, they would do 3 to get people to stop working, and then another 3 to tell them this is the end of Chol and now is the beginning of Kodesh. Erev Shabbat shebetoch echag hayu sham 48. So Erev Shabbat that fell out during the Chag, there would be 48. And what were they? Shalosh Tiftichat Sharim, Shalosh L'Shar Ha'elyon, V'Shalosh L'Shar Ha'tachton, V'Shalosh L'Milui Hamayim. Right? They had to go and get the water, right? On Erev Shabbat, they would have to get the water for the Nisuch Hamayim. So they blew shofar for that also. V'Shalosh Al Gabei HaMizbeach. 3 that were on when they were at the Mizbeach. Come back to that. Teishel Tamid Shel Shachar, like every day. There was 9 for the Tamid Shel Shachar, Teishel Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, Teishel Musafim. Then Shalosh Avtila Ta'amin HaMelacha, V'Shalosh Avdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. So the most tkiyot that would be in the Beit HaMikdash would be when it would be Erev Shabbat B'toch Echag, Erev Shabbat during Sukkot, which is probably one of the reasons this Mishnah is brought here in the end of Sukkot. So I don't think we're going to go through all of this with the Bar Tanura. I just thought this would be interesting to bring as a side thing. But are there any questions or comments?
Is there a parallel Mishnah for the Tamid in the afternoon? Is everything the same?
So we're going to come to that, but no, it's really interesting. The Masechet Tamid, as we saw, now we're at the very end. Next week we'll do the Shirim, but it actually only deals with the Tamid Shel Shachar. How things were done in Tamid Ben Arbaim, it was almost exactly the same, but there are some differences. One of the things that I told you we would go back to do is we were going to discuss the menorah, because that is one of the things that's different between morning and at the end of the day. But we'll talk about the Seder Hayom for the afternoon, evening. I want to talk about that again before we go back to Yoma. So, very good question. But no, the Mishnah here doesn't tell us.
Also,
Okay.
it seems to be that
Yeah, go ahead.
it seems to be that in general one doesn't. I mean, the language, not just this last paragraph, not just this last Mishnah that we discussed, but in general, it seems that the language in Mishnah does not talk about sides of the Mizbeach, but rather corners of the Mizbeach.
Well, here it does.
It seems to me, I seem to recall other points also where it talks about corners rather than sides. It seems
but the Mishnah elsewhere talks about sides of the Mizbeach when it's relevant, like when there are Mishnayot in Masechet Zvachim that talk about which sides of the Mizbeach that you have to put blood, and do you put it above the Sikra or below the Sikra. There's also there's a point halfway up the Mizbeach that's called the Sovev, Balo the Sovev, right? But did you want to make a particular point about that?
not in.
So, but you're correct that here the emphasis is on the corners because the corners are relevant. But it's not that the Mishnah elsewhere doesn't talk about sides. The sides are also relevant at different times. But I mean, it's a good observation to point out. We should be careful to point out the different parts. And I'm debating, and I think that maybe we will spend a little bit of time also before we go back to Yoma with maybe some of the Mishnayot and Midot to better understand some of these geographical things, including the Mizbeach. there's a lot of, there are many different aspects and parts to the Mizbeach that I think behooves us to understand a little bit better, and we'll look at that maybe in the Mishnah and the Sechet Midot. But next, if anybody wants to prepare in advance, you can look through the Shirim Shel Yom that we say every day. But I would like to take some time to look at them, not in great depth, but at least to get a better idea of what each of them are there for, and why we say each one each day. Michael Werner, I'm sorry, what did you want to say?
No, I mean, it's striking and poignant that the Kohen Gadol here is referred to as, like a Ben Bait, as opposed to a servant or as opposed to a minister, or, I mean, really, the emphasis really is on, Avinu. As opposed
Right, does
to
that
Magen.
remind you of something else that we learned a long time ago? Where else do we see this idea of the Ben Bait? It must be in the back of your mind because you mentioned not like a minister and not like a servant. So where did we talk about that?
So there's some synapse firing back in the murk, but it's
Okay, when we were learning Masechet Ta'anit and we learned the story of Chonia Ma'agel, that Shimon ben Chetach said he was Ben Bayit. He was like a Ben Bayit. And then Toch Kedei, I showed you the Gemara Masechet Brachot about Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, who was like he was like an Eved in the house of the Lord, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe, was like a Sar. And those were those three relationships that at the time we talked about. So I was thinking maybe I should mention it, but so I'm glad you brought it up. So there's this idea also that the Kohen Gadol is like a Ben Bayit. And in the immediate sense we see in the Mishnah, it means that he has greater access. He can actually walk around the Mizbech at will, where other Kohanim are not allowed to unless they're there for a specific avodah. We also see that the Kohen Gadol, he can at will go into the Hechal in order to bow down, even though that's not a regular avodah, but he can do it as an avodah. And of course, that he can do any of the avodot without a pais, and he's notel chelik berosh, right? He can choose the first and the best of any of the korbanot that are there for taking. So all of the aspects of Ben Bayit. Yes.
Of course, when we hear about all his, when we read about all his regalia, and all the pomp and circumstance, we would tend to think of him as more of a Sar, and so it's striking that he's actually described as a Ben Bayit.
It could be he also has aspects as a Sar, but but it's true here in the Mishnah he's described as a Ben Bayit, mainly because of this idea of access. But you're correct to point out that he dresses like a king, he dresses regally. So that would be more like a Sar. So maybe that's something that we'll talk about more when we get back to Yoma, and we talk about when he switches back and forth between the different clothing. Very good.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the Am has a very restricted participation in what is going on in the Beit HaMikdash. So the Kohanim are doing whatever they are doing according to the rules. And there are probably a few people around also who came there. On Yom Kippur, there are probably many, but on the usual days,
every day there's the Anshe Mishmar who come, right? There are people. There was a schedule where different parts of, Bnei Israel would come to be Anshe Mishmar, to be the Am. But yes, go on.
The Am did it well. They had some mitzvot, of course, but
They were there mainly. They were there mainly.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, they were there to pray, and they were there to pray and to be representatives, like witnesses and representatives of the Am when korbanot tzibur were being brought. So there had to be a tzibur outside of the Kohanim and the Leviim. Those were the Anshe Mishmar.
Yes, but most people, most Jews at that time, they were far away, and even those living in Jerusalem, they didn't.
No, exactly.
Really participate in.
Right, exactly. Most people didn't show up every day. It seems like, right, the most that you would get like Hamonam to come would be for the Regalim. Yes. And like we saw, right, when we looked in Masechet Psachim, then people would come, they had to bring it. But outside of the Regalim on a given day, so that's the thing. They made sure that there were Bnei Yisrael, like that there were Yisraelim there every day. They set up this system of the Mishmarot. So the Anshe Mishmar would always be there. But no, you're absolutely right. The heavy lifting, like we say, that was done by the Kohanim. That was their job. And the Leviim, their main job was to be, certainly one of the main jobs was to be there to do the shir. Yeah.
So they're living in an ivory tower. This Kohanim.
The Kohanim, yes. Well, why? And what's your point? What do you mean?
Again, that. I know that there are some mitzvot which the Am was supposed to do, but they didn't do a lot.
They didn't do a lot, but on the other hand, I just also want to point out, remember the Kohanim also, they weren't all, as it were, living in an ivory tower. They were living apart, but remember, they weren't there all year round. They took turns.
That mishmarot.
They had, right? They would have their turns, and then they would go back to wherever they were. And I think as you know from reading the Torah, on the one hand, they listen. What I'm going to tell you now is the theory, but we know also from the Gemara that some of this was in practice. The theory is that the Kohanim, on the one hand, were mod mechubadim, right? They had this very highly honorable position. And of course, they are the intermediaries for the Am, between the Am and Hashem. On the other hand, they weren't the gentry, they weren't the landowners, right? Because they only got to live in the 6 Arim. And their livelihood was dependent upon the matanot that Bnei Yisrael would give them. And if you're, let's say, Yisrael, and you bring a korban shlamim, so let's say parts of the korban go to the kohen, the chazeh v'shok go to the kohen. If you have crops, you have to give the truma, and then you have to give. But you as a Yisrael, you could choose which kohen would get that. You didn't have it wasn't given to a pool. You could choose the Kohen to give your trumot to. So there was that, if you think about that also, it gives some leverage to the Israel. So that they, you had to still be nice to the little people because they're the ones who are actually paying your salary, as it were, right? They're the ones who are feeding you. So yes, on the one hand, they're in a kind of an ivory tower in the sense that they're not the ones who are responsible mainly for the agriculture, which of course is the vast majority of the economy. Right? The economy is not really dependent on the Kohanim, and they're living off the people who are doing that work. On the other hand, we also see that even though they only work maybe altogether, what would it be, like 4 weeks out of the year, they do their rotation would make them work 2 weeks out of the year, and then they also have to come on the Chagim. So I guess altogether like 5 weeks because they stay for a whole week after Shavuot. But we see when they're in the Beit HaMikdash, the work they do is real work. Like they're actually doing hard work. So it's an interesting system. Michael Werner, you wanted to add something.
Simply because I mean there is at least an implicit there are at least implicit relationships between the precinct and its hinterland. So
Say that again. Between
the precinct and its hinterland. Between Har HaBayit and its prince. Between Har HaBayit and its hinterland. On the one hand, there are all the materials being brought in for the korbanot. And all the other material, also sort of all the other material elements of the avodah are coming from the outside and are coming from outside of the Kohanim. On the other hand, there are also things going outwards, not just flows of people, but also sound, visual, all kinds of visual cues. I mean, there's a way in which time itself is structured by what happens on Har HaBayit, which means that in some sense, daily material life becomes a kind of participation in Avodat Beit HaMikdash.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we saw elsewhere that in the surrounding area people would hear things, right? We said that in Yericho they could hear the opening of the door of the Ulam, right? And everybody could hear this magrefa when that was thrown. So if you lived in Yerushalayim and in surrounding area, you would have these audio cues, and then we know from other things that there would be certain visual cues, like if you learn the Mishnayot in Psachim, like on Erev Pesach, they would put up the what was left over from the Lachmei Todah, and then when they took this many down, they knew that was time to stop eating chametz, and they took this many down, and they knew it was time to start burning. And people, if you lived not just in Yerushalayim, but if you lived in the surrounding area, you would see the smoke coming from the altar. So you're right, Michael. I mean that it wouldn't go all the way up to to the Galil. It wouldn't go all the way over to Chof HaYam. But in the surrounding area, it made a real impact, and something that we don't have anymore. Here I can tell you where I live, the biggest impact of my day was Bibi's shayara going by and making a lot of noise, but it didn't have the same sense of kedusha that I think I would get from hearing the tekiyot in the Beit HaMikdash. That's just my personal take, but... So anyway, yeshakach to all of you. Have a good evening. Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.